I still remember the night it happened. It was one of those evenings that starts out ordinary, but somehow transforms into something you know you'll carry with you forever. My friend Ellie had invited me to her housewarming party. Nothing too fancy, just a gathering of friends to celebrate her new place. A charming two-story townhouse with exposed brick walls and windows that caught the sunset in a way that made everyone look like they were glowing from within. I almost didn't go. Work had been exhausting that week, and the thought of making small talk with strangers seemed more daunting than usual. But Ellie had this way of convincing me to step outside my comfort zone, promising that I'd thank her later. She wasn't wrong. I arrived fashionably late, around 9, when the party was already humming with energy. Music pulsed through the rooms, not too loud, just enough to fill the spaces between conversations. Laughter bubbled up from different corners as I navigated through clusters of people, some familiar faces, others I'd never seen before. Ellie spotted me from across the room and waved enthusiastically, her smile bright enough to chase away any lingering doubts I had about coming. She rushed over, drink in hand, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and something citrusy. "You made it," she exclaimed, pulling back to look at me. "I was beginning to think you'd stood me up." She handed me a glass of something amber-colored. "Here, you need to catch up. And there's someone I want you to meet." Before I could protest, she was guiding me through the crowd, her hand firm on my elbow. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, engaged in what looked like a deeply fascinating conversation with a guy I recognized from Ellie's office. But the moment we approached, his eyes shifted to me, and I felt something inside me stutter. He wasn't conventionally handsome in that movie star way, but there was something magnetic about him. Maybe it was the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, or how he seemed completely at ease in his own skin. "This is the friend I was telling you about," Ellie said to him, then turned to me. "This is Daniel. He's new in town, working at the architectural firm downtown." She gave me a meaningful look that I pretended not to understand before disappearing back into the crowd, leaving us alone in that peculiar way that only happens at parties, surrounded by people, yet somehow isolated in our own bubble. "So you're the famous friend," he said, his voice warm and slightly teasing. "Ellie's told me a lot about you. All terrible things, I'm sure," I replied, taking a sip of my drink to hide the sudden nervousness I felt. He laughed, and the sound seemed to travel directly to my core. "Quite the opposite, actually, though she failed to mention how you light up a room just by walking into it." Under normal circumstances, I would have rolled my eyes at such an obvious line. But there was something in his expression, a genuine quality that made the words land differently. We fell into conversation easily after that, discovering shared interests in obscure indie films and a mutual love for hole-in-the-wall bookstores. Time seemed to slip away as we talked, the party continuing around us like background noise in a film. The atmosphere of the party shifted as the night progressed. What had started as a lively gathering began to take on a more intimate quality. The music had softened, the lighting seemed dimmer, creating pockets of shadow that made each conversation feel more private. I noticed how Daniel's gaze would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking, how he found small excuses to touch my arm or lean closer to hear me over the music. Each point of contact sent a small thrill through me, like tiny electrical currents. We had migrated from the kitchen to a small alcove near the staircase, our conversation flowing from topic to topic with an ease that felt both surprising and inevitable. He told me about growing up in a small coastal town, how he'd always dreamed of designing buildings that would become part of a city's identity. I shared stories about my own childhood, my work as a freelance photographer, the trip to Japan I'd been saving for. There was something about him that made me want to share parts of myself I usually kept guarded. "You know," he said during a brief lull in our conversation, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Ellie mentioned she has an amazing view from the rooftop deck. Apparently, you can see the entire downtown skyline lit up at night." I knew what he was suggesting, a moment away from the crowd, a chance to be alone. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because I recognized the potential weight of that decision. Going upstairs with him would shift something between us, acknowledge the current of attraction that had been building all evening. "I'd love to see it," I finally said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice despite the flutter in my chest. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that suggested he understood exactly what was happening between us. "Follow me," he said, extending his hand. I took it, his palm warm against mine, and let him lead me toward the staircase. The wooden steps creaked slightly under our weight as we began to ascend. I was acutely aware of him just ahead of me, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He glanced back at me halfway up, a question in his eyes that I answered with a small smile. "Watch your step here," he said, his voice lower now that we were away from the noise of the party. "The lighting isn't great." As if to emphasize his point, he reached back and placed his hand lightly on my waist, guiding me up the narrower section of the staircase. His touch felt both protective and possessive, sending a cascade of warmth through my body. We continued our ascent in a charged silence, the sounds of the party growing fainter with each step. And then it happened, that moment I'd replay in my mind countless times in the days and weeks to come. We reached the landing, a small square space illuminated by a single wall sconce that cast more shadows than light. I paused, suddenly uncertain, the reality of what we were doing hitting me all at once. He must have sensed my hesitation because he turned to face me, his expression softening. "Second thoughts?" he asked, no pressure in his tone, just genuine concern. I shook my head, unable to articulate the swirl of emotions I was feeling: excitement, nervousness, a thrilling sense of stepping into unknown territory. As I moved to continue up the second flight of stairs, I felt a gentle tug at my waist. He had caught my belt loop with his finger, stopping me in my tracks. The small action was playful yet intimate, claiming me in a way that made my heart race. "Wait," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just wait a moment." Time seemed to suspend itself on that landing. The distant thump of music from downstairs, the soft glow of the wall sconce, the way his eyes searched mine. Everything crystallized into a perfect moment of anticipation. I was caught, not just by my belt loop, but by the intensity of what was building between us. "I've been wanting to do this all night," he murmured, his free hand coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from my face. The simple gesture felt more intimate than any kiss, his fingertips leaving trails of warmth against my skin. "Do what?" I asked, my voice betraying me with a slight tremor. "Get you alone," he replied, his honesty disarming me. "There's something about you. I can't quite put my finger on it. But from the moment Ellie introduced us, I felt like I needed to know you better." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. In my experience, confidence often masked a reluctance to reveal any genuine emotion. But here he was, still holding onto my belt loop, openly expressing his interest without any of the games I'd grown accustomed to. "I feel it too," I confessed, surprising myself with my candor. "It's a little scary, actually." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "The best things usually are." We stood there on the landing, caught in a moment of shared vulnerability, neither of us rushing to break the spell. He released my belt loop but didn't step away, instead moving slightly closer until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I almost didn't come tonight. I've only been in town for a few weeks, and I've been buried in work, trying to prove myself at the firm. Ellie's been trying to get me to socialize, meet new people, but I kept making excuses." He paused, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm really glad I changed my mind." His admission mirrored my own earlier reluctance, creating another unexpected connection between us. "I almost bailed too," I told him. "Rough week, too tired for small talk, the usual excuses. And yet here we are," he said softly, "on this landing, having anything but small talk." The intimacy of the moment was intoxicating. Standing there, partially hidden from the rest of the party, I felt like we were creating our own private world. I found myself sharing things I rarely discussed with new acquaintances: my fear of settling for a life that looked good on paper but lacked passion, my complicated relationship with my parents, the photography project I'd been too afraid to pursue seriously. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaged, not just waiting for his turn to speak. In return, he opened up about his own insecurities, the pressure he felt to succeed in a competitive field, his worry that moving to a new city had been a mistake, the way he sometimes felt like an imposter in his own life. "Let me show you something," he said suddenly, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his gallery and then turned the screen toward me. It was a sketch, beautifully detailed, of a building unlike any I'd seen before. Organic lines flowing into more structured elements, large windows capturing natural light, green spaces integrated throughout. "This is my dream project," he explained, his passion evident in the way his eyes lit up. "Not the kind of thing my firm would ever approve, but someday." He trailed off, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely, touched that he would share something so personal. "You should pursue it." "Maybe," he replied, putting his phone away. "When the time is right." Our conversation had shifted the dynamic between us, deepening the connection beyond mere physical attraction. But that attraction was still very much present, perhaps even intensified by the emotional intimacy we'd established. I became hyper-aware of how close we were standing, how easy it would be to close the small distance between us. The tension built as we stood there, neither of us making a move, yet both clearly aware of what was happening. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the anticipation building like electricity before a storm. His gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes, a question in them that needed no words. I made the decision in that moment, to take the risk, to lean into the connection that had formed so unexpectedly. I moved forward slightly, just enough to signal my consent, my intent. He understood immediately, his hand coming up to cup my face with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. When our lips finally met, it wasn't the explosive passion of movies or novels. Instead, it was something more profound, a slow, deliberate exploration, a conversation without words. His lips were soft against mine, tentative at first, then more assured as I responded. I felt his other arm wrap around my waist, drawing me closer until I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest. The kiss deepened, my hands finding their way to his shoulders, then the nape of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, the world narrowing to just this landing, just this moment, just us. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, I felt disoriented in the best possible way, as if I'd been spun around and set down in a slightly different reality. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've been wanting to do that since you walked in," he admitted, his voice slightly rough. I laughed softly, feeling lighter than I had in months. Was it worth the wait? His eyes opened, meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Definitely worth the wait. Though I wouldn't mind doing it again, just to be sure. This time when he kissed me, there was more confidence, more certainty. My back pressed against the wall of the landing, his body a warm presence against mine. I lost myself in the sensation, in the rightness of it all, until the sound of laughter from downstairs reminded me of where we were. We pulled apart, both smiling a bit sheepishly at being so caught up in each other. "So," he said, his finger once again hooking into my belt loop, playfully tugging me closer. "About that rooftop view. Lead the way," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. As we continued up the second flight of stairs, his hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally. I couldn't help but think about how unexpected the evening had turned out to be, how a party I'd almost skipped had led to this connection that felt simultaneously new and somehow familiar, like finding something I hadn't realized I was missing. The rooftop deck was everything he'd promised, the city spread out before us in a tapestry of lights, the night air cool but not cold, the distant sounds of traffic and life creating a perfect backdrop. We stood side by side at the railing, his arm around my waist, my head resting against his shoulder. "Thank you," he said after a comfortable silence. "For what?" "For coming upstairs with me. For taking a chance." He turned to look at me, his expression earnest. I know it might seem fast or impulsive, but I can't shake the feeling that this is the beginning of something important. I understood exactly what he meant. There was something about our connection that felt significant, as if the universe had orchestrated our meeting for a reason. It wasn't just physical attraction or compatible personalities. It was a sense of recognition, of finding someone who saw me clearly and liked what they saw. "I feel it too," I admitted. "It's a little terrifying." He laughed softly. "The best things usually are," he repeated his earlier words, giving my waist a gentle squeeze. We stayed on the rooftop for what felt like hours, talking, sharing occasional kisses, learning the contours of this new thing growing between us. By the time we finally made our way back downstairs to the party, which had thinned considerably, something had fundamentally shifted. What had started as a chance encounter at a housewarming party had transformed into a beginning. Of what exactly, I wasn't sure yet, but I was eager to find out. Ellie caught my eye as we rejoined the remaining guests, her knowing smile suggesting she'd had this planned all along. I couldn't even pretend to be annoyed with her matchmaking. Not when Daniel's hand was still warm in mine. Not when my lips still tingled from his kisses. Not when my heart felt fuller than it had and longer than I could remember. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Daniel walked me to my car, our pace deliberately slow, neither of us quite ready for the evening to end. When we reached my vehicle, he pulled me close one more time, his kiss a promise of more to come. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked, his voice holding a note of vulnerability that touched me deeply. "I'd like that," I replied, meaning it more than I could express. We exchanged numbers, made tentative plans for dinner the following evening, and shared one final kiss before I reluctantly got into my car. As I drove home, I couldn't stop smiling, replaying the events of the night in my mind, especially that moment on the landing when he caught my belt loop, when everything changed. That was 6 months ago now. Daniel and I have been together ever since, our relationship deepening in ways I couldn't have imagined that first night. We still talk about the landing sometimes, how that small moment, him catching my belt loop, pausing our ascent, became the symbol of our beginning. Ellie takes full credit for our relationship, of course, never missing an opportunity to remind us that we owe her our happiness. And perhaps we do, because sometimes the most significant moments in our lives come when we least expect them, at parties we almost didn't attend, on landings we didn't know existed, with people we hadn't yet met. The journey of love often begins with a single step, or in our case, with a caught belt loop on a dimly lit landing, where two people paused long enough to recognize something special in each other. It's a reminder that sometimes, the most meaningful connections happen when we allow ourselves to be caught, to be vulnerable, to take risks in pursuit of something that feels right. Daniel and I don't know what the future holds for us, but we're climbing those stairs together, one step at a time, creating our own landings along the way, moments to pause, to connect, to remind ourselves of how it all began. And every time he playfully catches my belt loop now, it's both a memory and a promise of how far we've come and how much further we might go, together. Total _char_count, 18,716.